Welcome to Work Identification Process Descriptions. Thank you for your interest. We hope you'll take time after this short presentation to explore the other Triad Unlimited presentations on YouTube, follow us on LinkedIn, and visit our website to see all our services and training offerings. Here's the definition of work identification. Work identification takes the raw material of a request to perform work and turns it into a formatted set of information that can be digested by the downstream work management processes. All work performed must meet work identification process requirements, whether it's performed in-house, during an outage, or by contractors. It's all the same. It begins here. The four processes for work identification are how all work is prepared for introduction into the work control system. That's process one. Process two is how emergencies are classified and introduced into the corrective maintenance workflow. Process three is how shutdown work or outage work is classified and introduced into the outage maintenance workflow. And process four is how contracted work is classified and introduced into the maintenance workflow. The idea here is to not add any chaos into the work control system on the front end. By evaluating incoming requests for work for priority in the work stream, identifying work that is important enough to break schedule for, segregating work that requires the equipment to be shut down, and managing contracted work content and quality, the entire work control system does just what its name implies. We want to be managing work, not reacting to crises. There are several benefits in having processes to identify work. If we use these processes, work is uniformly prepared for introduction into the work control system, and it maintains our focus on risk when we do it. Emergency work has criteria that define it. It controls escalation and the associated costs that go with escalation. Outages are anticipated, and scope is controlled, reducing unplanned downtime. Contracted work is integrated into the work control system, which improves cost control and an understanding of what work got performed. Work identification only applies to corrective maintenance. Preventive maintenance and predictive type work is generally already identified and generated automatically within the Computerized Maintenance Management System, or CMMS. So the first step in work identification is to ensure that a problem can be effectively communicated. And the way we do this is we find out who's the originator, how can we get in touch with them if we have questions, provides a point of contact in the event that there are questions about the job. Field tagging and naming is reflected in the what piece of equipment is it, what's the official name of it in the CMMS. Put that on the work request if you can. And a problem statement. Why are we doing this work? What's the pain that the originator's feeling? What's the concern? And then the initial prioritization. Usually, if an originator is doing the prioritization, it's going to be a little bit higher than it may be once we analyze it, but it's a good idea to do that initial prioritization so that there's some sense of where this request might fit in the world of all the other requests. This is the minimum information that's necessary on a work request. It should align with some standard and be required in order to initiate work. And a standard is something that will control how a work request is submitted. Like, how do I submit it? Do I call from a phone? Do I have to fill out a piece of paper? Can I do it electronically? And then somebody's got to review the work request to make sure it's valid, to make sure it's not a repeat of another open work request, and then approve that work request or cancel it. And how does that occur? Who talks to who and what's the time frame for that? Then the work order becomes a work order from the work request, and it becomes a prioritized work order. And there has to be a process or a method to control that. So everything starts to fall into place when we have this original required bit of information to get the process going. It's very important to get this right. Process two in work identification is emergent work identification methodology. When work is initially identified as an emergency, it should be evaluated against some criteria before entering the emergency work process flow. Questions like, is there imminent danger to personnel or equipment? Is there imminent environmental impact? Is there significant impact on production capability? So if you take a look at this leaking flange and you don't know the process or you don't know where it's at and you just look at it and you're a casual walker by, yeah, maybe you would identify it as an emergency because flanges aren't supposed to leak and there's a reason that they're there and so on and so forth. But then you have to go evaluate it. Maybe it's in a remote area that isn't affected by the spill of water, or there's some other factors that are part of the evaluation that is this really an emergency based on those criteria that we just listed. The important thing is that true emergencies are addressed quickly, while non-emergencies are not artificially elevated to emergency status. Remember, we want to remain cool, calm, and collected in the way we manage assets. If we don't have a constant sense of risk and priority, things can get unhinged pretty quickly. People care about things that directly affect them, and if the process of prioritization toward emergency status is based on feelings and emotion, it can not only create chaos, but also create divisions and strife between people and departments. The method and responsibility for work evaluation should be proceduralized and consistently practiced. The third process in work identification is outage work identification methodology. Part of incoming work processing is an evaluation of whether an issue will require equipment to be shut down during repair. This evaluation is generally performed only for new corrective work orders, since PMs and other proactive tasks are usually only planned once, and the necessary shutdown requirements or outage requirements are already known. These will be reviewed periodically under a separate process to make sure they remain valid if operating context changes or equipment is changed out, added, or retired. Production assets only create value when they're in operation, and there's no drama like the drama of a shutdown that's gone over its planned duration. So it's important to identify when the shutdown will happen, how long it will last, the parts and materials and labor that will be required, and how a startup will be executed for post-maintenance testing to be performed. So this initial review to determine if a work order requires equipment to be shut down or worked during an outage is no joke. The review is usually performed by maintenance and operations together, depending on the organization. Often, operations is responsible for tagging out systems in larger equipment groups, while maintenance is responsible for ensuring the personal safety of personnel that are working on a specific work order. There are many, many variations on this theme, but the point is that there can be a lot of safety and money on the line. Some shutdowns are not performed in response to any specific maintenance need, but are scheduled on a seasonal or production turnaround basis. These recurring planned outages are great, but care must be taken to identify everything that can be done during the outage and plan accordingly. For these types of shutdowns, it's important to have performed a work order classification that identifies all the work orders that will be executed. As a planned shutdown approaches, these work orders are selected to enter the planning and scheduling processes in time to secure the parts, materials, and labor necessary to ensure the shutdown scope and schedule can be honored. I was a maintenance planner for many years, as well as an outage manager, and believe me when I tell you, there is nothing that will make you famous quicker than going through a shutdown and then shortly thereafter having something break that could have been addressed during the shutdown. Identifying outage work is important. Depending on how the organization is constructed, contracted work can be routine PM, routine corrective, emergency, or outage related, or all the above. Contractors are often engaged to work on equipment that is under warranty, or is complex, or requires special tools and techniques, or is outside the core business practice. Regardless of the reason for using contracted services, contracted work must be identified and controlled within the larger work control system. By doing this, contracted work can be identified, planned, scheduled, and executed just like any other work without any surprises, delays, or other issues outside the norm. Another reason to identify contract work is to ensure the work enters the closeout review work stream after it's executed. This allows in-house supervisory review of work performed and evaluation of work quality. To summarize Function 1, work identification is designed as a series of processes that, taken together, ensure that all identified work undergoes an initial review, identically. Issues meeting defined criteria can be elevated to emergency status. Work that impacts production is directed to the outage work stream, and contracted work is processed and integrated into the primary work control processes. This concludes the Work Identification Process Descriptions presentation. Thank you for participating.